The Canada Grand Prix not only meant a new opportunity for the teams to adjust strategies in a circuit known for their unpredictability, but also became the epicenter of a technical revelation that recalled Ferrari's foundations. It all started with an anecdotal, almost absurd fact. A marmot crossed the layout of the Gilles-Villeneuve circuit just when Lewis Hamilton at the wheel of the SF25 on tour number 13. The impact was inevitable. The animal was overwhelmed, and although the car managed to stay on track, the technical consequences would be deeper than anyone at that time could imagine. The blow destroyed part of the flat background of the car, a vital component in the generation of aerodynamic load. At first glance, it seemed an unfortunate but manageable situation, something that a team like Ferrari could solve with a superficial review or a simple replacement of pieces. However, the data that began to reach the team monitors were worrisome. Hamilton was losing between 4 and 5 tenths for constantly. The engineers initially assumed that the damage was limited to a small loss of aerodynamic efficiency. But soon they would understand that the incident had not generated the problem, but had exposed a much more serious failure that had been affecting the car since the beginning of the season. It was that moment of apparent chance that acted as a catalyst to discover that the SF25 had a structural vulnerability that simply had not been clearly detected in the previous data. Telemetry revealed that after the impact, the car lost approximately 20 aerodynamic load points. That figure, in the technical language of Formula One, is equivalent to losing half a second for return in pure performance, a competitive abyss. But the really disconcerting was not the magnitude of the loss, but the way it affected the balance of the car. The distribution of the load ceased to be progressive, and went on to concentrate erratically in areas of the chassis, generating unpredictable behavior that could only be noticed when combined with the physical stress of a real career. The most ironic thing is that Hamilton, during the first races, had been the target of criticism for not finding rhythm, for not adapting to the car, and even being overvalued in this new stage with Ferrari. But now, everything pointed out that his supposed bad adaptation was nothing more than a constant struggle against a car that had problems of conception since his birth. In Canada, it was not a disastrous classification or a failed strategy that alarmed the alarms. It was a small animal that crossed the track. That casual clash was, without knowing it, the event that brought to light one of the worst design errors in the recent history of the Italian team. Frédéric Vasseur, upon receiving complete reports after the race, could not believe what he was reading. The coldness of the data revealed a different narrative from the one Ferrari had built during the first third of the championship. The confidence that the adjustments in time would solve Hamilton's problems collapsed completely. It was no longer a pilot who needed to adapt, but a car that should never have gone to compete without solving such an elementary structural failure. The impact of that discovery would be devastating for the morale of the team, and would mark a before and after in the way Ferrari would manage its technical development for the rest of the year. When Ferrari's technical team was locked in Maranello after the Canada Grand Prix, which began as a simple damage review, became a true autopsy of a design that had been sold as an evolution of the SF24, but that in practice turned out to be a technical setback disguised as innovation. The investigation began with the data collected from the Hamilton car after the incident with the Marmota, but quickly climbed to a complete audit of the SF25 architecture. Each parameter, each suspension configuration, each aerodynamic mapping was put under the magnifying glass. What they found was not a series of minor errors, but a consistent pattern of structural failures that invalidated many of the hypotheses with which Ferrari had built their season. One of the first relevant findings was the behavior of the rear axle under dynamic load conditions. The car had systematic instability in situations where aerodynamic load changed quickly, as in transitions of long aggressive braking curves. This caused the rear of the car to become nervous, compromising the entrance and exit of curve, especially in paths with constant direction changes. Hamilton had described this sensation in the race as a lottery every time she touched the brake, and now it was clear that it was not an exaggeration. The erratic patterns in the distribution of the braking force did not have a simple explanation based on adjustments or brake temperature. The problem was much deeper. The braking system, despite having last-generation Brembo components, could not distribute the forces symmetrically between the rear wheels. But it was not a hardware failure, but a problem of interaction between the design of the rear suspension, the stiffness of the chassis, and the behavior of aerodynamic flow. The pressure exerted on the brakes varied unpredictably due to the way in which the aerodynamic load was transmitted from the floor of the car. At medium and low speeds, the car lost structural uniformity, which caused the pilot to constantly correct the balance with micro-adjusts in the steering wheel, losing crucial tenth after return. SF25 aerodynamics was also hard. In the wind tunnels and simulations by CFD, the car seemed to respond within the expected margins. However, on track, reality was very different. The aerodynamic load was not distributed progressively as projected. Instead, it concentrated excessively in specific areas of the chassis, especially close to the diffuser and the pontones, generating erratic behaviors by changing speed or curve. In high-speed curves, the car seemed to have a good step by curve, but when it reached technical zones such as Montreal chicanes or Monaco forks, the load was moving so steep that it caused unexpected subwiring or survival. It was as if the car had two personalities, one stable and competitive at high speed, and another nervous and ungovernable in more demanding conditions. Beyond the immediate impact on performance, this technical inconsistency meant that each configuration session was a Russian roulette. Settings that worked in a circuit could become counterproductive in another with minimally different conditions. It was impossible to establish a solid correlation between simulator data and what happened on the track. Track engineers and those responsible for aerodynamic development were completely disconnected, and that, in an organization like Ferrari, becomes an operational catastrophe. The mechanics did not know if they were adjusting for a real problem or for an illusion generated by a structural defect. The data, instead of helping, confused. And Hamilton, who had already shown frustration in previous sessions, could only confirm aloud what was already evident to all. The SF25 was a broken car. And worst of all, no one seemed to have a clear solution in the short term. Fred Vasseur had assumed Ferrari's leadership with the promise of bringing stability and a meticulous approach, oriented to long-term results. During his first full year in command, he managed to order several structural aspects that had been dragging from previous efforts. Boxes and boxes, uncoordinated strategies, lack of communication between departments. But what he never imagined was that, with Lewis Hamilton in the team and with a season raised as a potential candidacy for the title, he would have to face one of the worst nightmares for any team leader in Formula One. A competitive car in theory, but fundamentally defective in its design. Post-Canada discovery was not a simple disappointment. It was an absolute disintegration of the narrative they had built for 2025. When the complete reports arrived from the simulation area, wind and telemetry tunnel, Vasseur understood that it was not configuration settings or an unfinished adaptation of his new star pilot. The SF25 was not poorly balanced, it was badly conceived. They had based the development of the car on a series of erroneous assumptions that, although they went unnoticed under controlled wind tunnel conditions or initial tests with little dynamic load, collapsed in the reality of a grand prize where the demand is maximum. The new flat background, designed to be lighter and more flexible, did not properly stand the loads generated by the combination of curve-frequent treatment. And the rear pull rod suspension, incorporated to improve the lower aerodynamic flow, introduced unexpected flexions that distorted balance in each curve phase. Vasseur was not an aerodynamic engineer, but he knew perfectly the consequences of these findings. What disturbed him the most was the technical damage itself, but the fact that no one in the team would have anticipated it. During internal meetings, confidence in the data was blind. Mathematical models and virtual simulations had gained weight in decision-making to the point of relegating pilot sensations to the background. And now, ironically, it was Hamilton who, with his repeated complaints about the unpredictability of the car, had been closer to the truth than any graph on the screen. Those responsible for the wind tunnel began to be questioned. The decisions taken in the chassis design stage and the commitments assumed in search of greater aerodynamic efficiency now seemed taller strategic errors. Internally, an audit of responsibilities began. It wasn't just a matter of correcting the car. The process that had led Ferrari had to be completely redefined to trust a platform that, on the track, got rid of the minimum demand. Meanwhile, the challenge was double. Not only had to redesign key elements of the car without breaking the budget limit of the FIA financial regulation, but they should also prevent Hamilton from losing faith in the team. Because if something was clear after Canada, it is that a world champion can be patient. But to some extent. And if the team did not move decision and quickly, it could be found not only with a broken car but with a broken project. What happened in Canada is more than a technical anecdote or a peculiar history within the chaos inherent in Formula One. It is, in many ways, a warning. For Ferrari, it was a brutal reminder that historical prestige does not protect from contemporary error, and that no name, however great, can make up the cracks of a poorly structured project. The structural problems that have come to light are not the type of defects that are fixed with a minor aerodynamic update or an alternative configuration for the suspension. They are failures that require re-engineering, conceptual redesign. If Ferrari wants to change his destiny, he must begin by accepting the magnitude of his mistake. And for Lewis Hamilton, the reality is equally blunt. Not only has it had to adapt to a team with different culture and processes, but it has been found by driving a car that betrays it when you need more performance. But if something has demonstrated throughout his career, it is resilience. Its ability to rebuild, adapt to adverse environments, and above all, to continue looking for performance in the midst of chaos, will be key in the remainder of the season. What remains now is not just a race against the clock to correct what can be an SF25. It is a career to restore the credibility, internal and external, of a team that had been excited to return to the top.